getting ready to talk to Bill, my death row prison inmate at San Quentin. What I'm going to do today, we're going to take a lot of your questions, okay? A lot of it has to do with Idaho, those murders there. A lot of it has to do with his crime, what put him there, and San Quentin in general. So I took a lot of your questions and I'm going to put it to him. Now, he may answer them, he may not. He may be candid, he may not. I don't know. But we're gonna give it a shot. And again, you know, I speak to Bill because it helps me in my profession. Plain and simple. If people can't see that or don't want to see that, I don't care. Okay? It helps. It helps. That's all I can say. And I will continue to do it, and this is episode number 2. So stand by for my conversation with death row inmate Bill Noguera, who is serving, this is his 39th year on death row at San Quentin Prison for murder. All right, first question here, Bill. It says, how does Bill get so many privileges while on death row? TV, internet, schooling, wrote a book, taught classes. It doesn't sound like any death row I've read about. Have things changed for these inmates?
Well, nothing's really changed. I've worked within the system. Well, first of all, we don't get internet access. We do get televisions, and everybody in the state of California is allowed a television, and you can buy a stereo within the confines of your cell. You can't take them outside. You can't move them anywhere. They're in your cell. And to receive those privileges, if that's what you want to call them, you have to be a grade A condemned inmate. There are grade A and grade B. Grade B are the guys who are in the hole because they've committed some kind of violent act while on death row, a stabbing, a killing, or something of that nature. And I've never been involved in anything like that. So that's the answer about the televisions. In terms of art, there is an art program on death row that was given to us by federal court, and again, I used it within the confines of what I'm allowed, and that's basically what I did. Everything that I do is within the rules and privileges given and afforded to prisoners in the state of California. Okay,
makes sense. Second question we got here is about Idaho murders that we just went over last week. I think we both agreed that we can't say for sure it was a serial offender, but if it is a serial offender, would it be their first time?
Yeah, we are speculating, and no one knows for sure because I have not been in the crime scene. I have not looked at the evidence that law enforcement has. In my opinion, it is a serial offender, a person who came across these kids by casually saw them and then focused on them. If it is a serial offender, I don't believe it's his first time. It's too well planned out. He didn't leave anything there. He really didn't make any mistakes. There's no big forced entry. Those are things that I look at on how well someone performs. Usually, people that kill the first time, they make a lot of mistakes. It's the reason that we catch husbands or boyfriends or whoever in crimes committed when they know the person, because law enforcement focuses on people they know. And I'm sure that they focus very carefully on everyone these kids knew. That's why I'm leaning towards someone that has nothing to do with the kids and that he is experienced. He's done this before, or he's led up to it and he's thought about it. Most of the time, organized killers, which are serial killers.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
They usually plan things out very well. They fantasize about it, so they think things out. That's why I believe that this is a serial offender.
Okay, well, let's stick with the Idaho killings here. And someone wants to know, it was reported that the front door of that crime scene was left open that the morning after the offense occurred. Do you think that was on purpose? Or why would the offender leave that door open?
I don't think it really plays any part in his state of mind. He just walked out. If that's in fact what happened, I mean, he could have walked out the back door. He could have walked out, shimmied down the side of the building towards the back area, which on television they showed that it was a forest area. It's really hard to tell on why that door was open, and if it wasn't really left open. It could have been one of the roommates. It could have been somebody coming to the house. From what I understand, they didn't discover the bodies till later on in the morning.
Right.
So there's no telling. I don't think it's relevant to anything that really happened that night.
Okay, we're sticking with Idaho here. It says, I thought there was a dog on the floor, on the third floor. If the perpetrator was already in the house, why wouldn't the dog react to that, especially if the perpetrator was in the vacant bedroom or on the third floor? I don't know if you were aware of this dog that supposedly was in the house at that time.
Yeah, well, that even makes me feel that the perpetrator was in the house, because if there's a dog in the house and someone jimmies the door or goes in through a window, the dog is not aware of the person being there. Suddenly he's aware, he barks. That's what dogs do. I don't know how big the dog was or anything, so this is pure speculation. However, if the person was in the house and got to meet the dog, played around with the dog, if the perp actually scoped out the house, stalked them, he knew that dog was there. Maybe he gave it treats. Maybe, look, I've seen this happen before. A lot of perps are ready for that, especially if they're serial perps that have an intended victim in mind. So that even, I think, adds more weight to what I said to the perp was in the house prior to the kids getting home. He got to know the dog a little bit.
Right. Okay. Someone wants to know if you've ever met Scott Peterson.
You know, I've been asked that question like a million times, and the answer is absolutely. I met Scott Peterson. I've spoken to Scott Peterson. I got to know Scott Peterson purposely to just really get to know his mind. So the answer is absolutely.
Okay. Just curious, how many years did it take before you took ownership of your crime?
Well, I think it was just a process. The first time I was arrested, it felt a little surreal, very difficult to accept that I was in jail. And then it was just a growing process of understanding myself and then accepting that responsibility. It took, without fault and without lying, I think several years to really understand it. No one just from one day to the next just accepts things and knows that person's lying. It takes years. It takes decades for a person to accept responsibility for a crime. Hello?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, I thought the phone cut out.
I heard that too.
I'm sorry, but it takes a lot of time, and it took for me a lot of years of self-reflection.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Of understanding myself, and then accepting responsibility, and then figuring out what I could do to pay that debt back. And look, the truth is there's nothing I can do to pay that debt back. What I'm doing now is trying to educate and trying to help. I'm sure that that's not going to make up for it, but I'm very conscious of it, and therefore I continue to try.
Okay.
Hey, Ken.
Okay, do you want to continue with that, or were your thoughts on it done?
Well, actually, yeah, in reference to accepting responsibility, as I mentioned, it's a process that takes many years. And in doing so, I just didn't come across the idea of talking about serial killers or all these things just to try and make up for it. That took several decades for me to really understand how I could help. Now, it's not easy. It's very difficult. And in saying that, if there is something I could do more, I'm going to do it.
Right.
Whether that's charity work or whatever it takes. And working on these cold cases, I think it's something that could lend a helping hand.
Okay. Here's another question about Idaho. It says, can you ask him how the offender left the scene without leaving a trail of blood drops, footprints, fingerprints on the doors, etc.?
Yeah, that's an question, and the answer could be a lot simpler than people think. Sometimes you overthink things. I believe that there's a lot of blood there, obviously. So as he's leaving, he takes off his gloves. He had gloves on, no doubt. Now, if he were to have injured himself, there is evidence there. And that's why I suggested earlier that DNA is going to be a big part of this case and how this case is solved. DNA is everything. It isn't, guessing. It isn't arm choke quarterbacks a day, a month, a year later. It's law enforcement looking at DNA, and that's how we're going to find this perp. I believe there's blood in the house. I believe that he probably cut himself, as I explained last time. Usually, when a person uses a weapon, such as a knife, it's very up and personal. He just doesn't stab with one hand. His dominant hand holds the knife. His weaker hand grabs the person or holds the person steady. So I believe in that kind of ruckus, that type of struggle, where a person is struggling for their life, he may have cut himself, and the evidence will prove that.
And let's be clear here, because someone's going to ask this, because it popped into my mind too. If he was wearing gloves, he could easily have sliced through that glove with a knife, correct?
Oh, absolutely. When you're in the dark, stabbing away, and you're holding somebody, your aim isn't perfect. It's a struggle. It's a moving element, like a fight. You can't precisely predict where the person's going to be, and your hand could move with the person, meaning the weaker hand. So yes, I believe that even if he had gloves on, which I believe he did, he cut through those gloves and injured himself. Okay.
Next question. Have you met Charles Manson?
I have met Charles Manson. Charlie, as he's known, is he's not a good guy. I met him before his death in 1988 when I first arrived in St. Quentin. I was placed in the adjustment center, and it is exactly that. The adjustment center is where they adjust you. It's called the AC, and it is the worst hole that there is in the United States at that time, and Charles Manson was there. I went out to a yard, and he walked up to me with no provocation, tried to grab my hand, and he said something to the effect, "Brother, it's been years since we've seen each other." And of course, I was a kid. I didn't know who this guy was. I had never met Charles Manson prior to that. And look, I was a very young man. My response was very aggressive. I told him to get the bleeping away from me because I didn't want a child killer around me. He stumbled backwards and he left, and he never came out again.
Interesting. Idaho murders, and you kind of talked about this, but would the offender leave the same way that he entered?
Not necessarily.
Explain that.
Well, I believe that he didn't walk to the front door. It's my understanding that there are push button or some kind of lock in those doors. There was no forced entry from what you've said. So I believe he came through the door or through a window. I saw a television program where there's a tree right next to the house. He could have used that to gain access to an outside porch, or I don't know if that's what they call it, but an outside little part where there's a wooden deck out there. I saw that, if that's the home. I think that would be his point of entry. People normally don't lock those things because they think third floor, second floor, who's going to climb up a tree? Or it's just more than likely that that's the place where he entered. And I don't think he would walk out the front door because of he might have been seen. Front doors in today's age, they have cameras, they have a lot of different things. I believe he came in through a window and left the same way.
And do you think that that's normal in crimes? Because when an offender finds the way in, I mean, he came in that way, he knows that he can certainly go out that way because it worked coming in.
Absolutely. You don't want to start thinking while you're there. If he knows there's a safe escape route, and most people that are experienced usually have an escape route. They know how to get out. A good example of that is the Golden State Killer. When he was the East Bay rapist, he would always case houses. He would enter the homes prior to doing what he did, and he would leave the same way. And usually he left the door open or left the window open in the bathroom so he can come in. So that is the most logical explanation, is that he had an escape route as the one he came in through.
Okay. Next question here says, do you or did you ever have nightmares about what you did, your crime?
Well, as a person who's very conscious of what happened, the answer is yes. I spent many nights thinking about it and trying to understand how a teenager responds to things and how responsibility of that weighs on me. Look, any person who is a conscious person who understands his responsibility in the loss of human life, if he's conscious, if he's rehabilitated, he is never going to forget what happened and that he's ultimately responsible.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded
for the loss of human life. It sounds cliche-ish, but it's not. The person who doesn't think about it, the person who goes around his life... Hold on. A person that says he doesn't think about it, it's not his fault. He makes up other excuses. He hasn't dealt with it. And you have to deal with this situation. And even when you deal with it, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about that. And it's not simply just the person. It's their loved ones, the friends, it's the community, it's how it affected your family, it's how it affected everyone. Because you have to understand, when you commit a crime, there is a domino effect. It doesn't only affect the person, it affects everyone. That's a heavy burden to have. If you're dealing with it, if you've dealt with it, if you continue to deal with it, it's something that's going to be with you the rest of your life.
Right. And I want to interject there that there are some people, mainly sociopaths, who would never show any remorse. Or, when you would ask them that question, they would tell you, I have no remorse, if they're being honest.
Well, that's true. But also, in speaking to serial offenders and serial killers, some of them blame everybody else or blame the situation, or they say that they had a calling, they had to do it. I've sat there and listened to serial killers tell me that the circumstances that led to this was called upon him. He needed to do this. He had an intent because he was pushed to do it by a greater cause. It's incredible, but that's what they think. So you're right. They're sociopaths, they're psychopaths, they have no remorse whatsoever. If they took a lie detector test, they pass it.
What is the first thing you would do if you were ever released from prison?
Oh, wow. I don't think about that much. I would lie to you if I told you I did, and I'll tell you why. In 2017, a federal court reversed my conviction, threw out my sentence, threw everything out, and ordered me retried or released in 120 days. I had never thought of this before because I never thought I would ever get out. And I began to believe. There was a moment that I saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and I began to run towards it. When a year passed, then 2 years passed, 3, 4, 5 years passed, it was the greatest gut punch I've ever received in my life. So I don't think about ever getting out. I would lie to you if I told you that I did now. And if my mind ever steers towards that, I just wipe it away from my mind.
Okay. Well, this next question has to do with your crime, and if you can't answer it because of legal issues, just say that. It says here, have you had any contact with your codefendant, and do you still love her?
Well, to answer the question completely, I have not had any contact with my co-defendants in the time that I've been incarcerated. There's been no contact. I don't know what she's doing, where she's doing it. I know absolutely nothing about her. And in terms of feelings, I wish her the best in her life, and that's all I can say. I have no other thoughts about it.
And this is piggybacking that, it looks like, a little bit. What would you say to the victim's family right now if they were listening to this, if anything?
What would I say? What would I say to them?
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I can say, and that is that, I'm sorry for the consequences of my actions.
Okay.
This whole situation is my fault, and I accept that responsibility, and I am deeply remorseful and sorry about really the tornado that's ensued in their lives since then.
Okay. What do you feel? What's your feelings about the death penalty in general?
That's a really tricky question. As most know that listen to Death Row Diaries, I'm a conservative. I'm not a Republican or Democrat, but I have conservative viewpoints. And in terms of the death penalty,
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
In a perfect world, when we absolutely have the correct person, and he's a serial offender who is going to rape, kill, continue to kill, especially when it comes to children, I believe in the death penalty. And I believe that the legislations, when they put the death penalty on the table, they at least had the intent for it to be for the worst of offenders. Unfortunately, that has turned into the poor and people of color. So I don't think it works in California because, this is going to be kind of a rant, but let me just say this. The taxpayer wants results. The death penalty in California has been around since 1978. Billions have been spent. More than 1,900 people have been sentenced to death. There have been 13 executions in 50-plus years. And of those 1,900 people, more than 900 were given lesser sentence or have gotten out because they were innocent. The 700 that remain are going to get...
You have 60 seconds remaining.
And it doesn't work because the taxpayer's paying more than $100,000 per head, whereas as opposed to a person who receives a life sentence that pays about $42,000. It's still a lot of money in terms of capital. But when you put a person in prison this long, you're paying medical bills, you're paying dental. The taxpayer's not getting what he asked for. So it doesn't work.
Okay, so do you want to continue on your death row talk or move on to the next question?
Well, only that because I've lived it, I've experienced it, taxpayers should also know that as soon as a DA puts the death penalty on the table, automatically that defendant gets a death-qualified lawyer, which is a lawyer 3 times more expensive. He gets a defense, he gets an investigator, which he should. A pretrial detainee should get everything the law can afford him to defend himself against charges that could be true, could be also not true.
Right.
However, when he's convicted, here's the real Jimmy comes. I was finishing what I was saying is that once the person is convicted of a crime, then the system really wraps up in terms of the expenditures, and the taxpayer feels it. When a person is sentenced to death, he gets an automatic appeal. He gets automatic attorneys, investigators, an entire team of federal attorneys and state attorneys. It's a lot of money. And most of the time, the guy gets life. So I've been in prison for nearly 40 years. They gave me a death sentence. That death sentence now has been thrown out. So I'm going to get a lesser sentence. If taxpayers just, believe me, I know how it sells. We're going to be hard on crime. We're going to kill people who do bad crimes. It sounds great in the polls. It isn't really true. But here in California, of course, if you gave a person life, you limit that person. He doesn't get an automatic appeal. He doesn't get attorneys paid for by the state. He can file an appeal, but he'll have to file by his own means with himself in propria persona, which is proper, defending yourself, or that person will have to hire his own lawyer. That's a big difference.
Right.
So the death penalty doesn't work because it's too expensive and, well, they're not really killing anybody.
Okay. Someone wants to know, do serial killers talk about their crimes in prison?
It really depends on who they're talking to. The way I got very close to a number of serial killers was because I babysit a long time. They got to know who I was. I started speaking to them. I got close to them, and I was able to exchange information that they found attractive. They opened the door. I stepped in, and I got into their heads. That's a whole different ballgame. They normally do not speak about their crimes unless they're speaking to other serial killers, because people may not know this, serial killers have a lot of fans. They have clubs in prison where they share victim photographs. They have cards with their pictures and their victims in the pages in the, like baseball cards, the baseball players' ERA or their batting average or their home runs. Serial killers have cards that are exchanged to these different fan bases they have. In the back, they have victim counts, pictures of victims sometimes. So I use that as a lever to get close to them, but that's the only reason they talk to me. They normally don't share information with anybody.
Well, and this is my question off of that, do serial offenders hang out with other serial offenders? Is that how that works? Or is that just, you know how there's cliques? In high school, you had cliques. The jocks hung out with the jocks. The motorheads hung out with the motorheads. Is it the same way in prison? Serial killers hang out with serial killers?
Yeah, as crazy as it may sound, absolutely. Let me give you a mental picture. On the yard. Okay. I want you to get a mental picture of this. On the yard, where majority of serial killers are at, the table, there are 4 men seated, and they're playing pinochle. One of them is Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer. Across from him is David Carpenter, the trail side killer. Playing opposite them is Rodney Akala, the dating game killer, and William Bonning, the freeway killer. So the answer to the question is yes. They absolutely hang out together.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
All right, next question. And I think you already covered this, but someone wants to know, why did you reach out to Ken Maines? Or are you manipulating him for some nefarious reason?
Well, the answer to the question is, I don't think that there's many people that can manipulate Ken Maines. His experience alone would probably, that'd be a bad shot. But the reasons I reached out to him were very legitimate. I wrote a book on a particular serial killer. I won't mention his name because we're under a confidentiality agreement. But there needed to be investigations done on the crimes that this serial killer confided in me about. I had just seen a program called The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, and I saw Ken. I thought, look, this guy can really, he knows his stuff. He's not fake. This guy is a real guy. He's not a TV actor. So I asked Matt Ralston, who is my co-host of Death Row Diaries, to reach out to Ken, because I don't have any way to get his phone number or his address or anything. Matt reached out to him, and Ken responded that yes, he was interested. Once a back and forth was exchanged between Ken and I with regular snail mail letters, we agreed for me to share the information with him. He came aboard, and we can only say this much, is that Ken did exactly what Ken is known for. He solved a case within 48 hours. That's how he and I have come together, and that's how, I think that he believes in what I have to bring, and I obviously believe in him.
Yeah. Okay, this next question I'm really interested in myself, and I want to see what you know about it. Crime scene staging. Why do offenders do that, and how can you tell if it's done?
Wow, that's a great question because, before we got on the air today, I had actually spoken to you about that exact element. And it had to do with the case we're going to be discussing very soon, which is the yogurt shop murders. And the question I had for you, the observation I had for you, was that stacking the bodies the way they were could have been an experienced perp stacking them purposely to throw off police. Not not because he had a particular idea in mind, but because it throws an abstract element into the crime scene, and it makes law enforcement stumble to try and figure out and waste time as to why those bodies are stacked. So the answer to the question is yes. So the answer is yes.
Well, let me piggyback off of that, Bill. And, do they do it, in your experience, because, let's say they want to make a sexual assault look like a burglary. So they'll do certain things, whatever that is. But does that, in their mind, in the offender's mind, do they think that will really work? If we stage it to look like a burglary and it's actually a sexual assault, or vice versa? Or is that just something they do because that's what they've been told, growing up or reading books, that's what you should do? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think the inexperienced person obviously stages something with not much thought behind it. They've seen things on television, they've read books, so they try it. But the perp I'm talking, I think the question that was asked was, do offenders actually stage? And I mean by stage, not when you do a rape, you make it look like a robbery or something. I believe what they were talking about was that they stage it. Everybody knows it's a multiple murder, but they stage it to throw police off in terms of an element that they don't know about. Not something so simple as burglary or robbery, but something much more twisted. The person will pose the body, hoping they believe it's a serial killer. Or, you see what I'm saying? They do things to throw police off, but it's much deeper than just burglary, robbery. It's something that they believe will just trip them up, not really give them a different motive, because stacking bodies doesn't really throw the motive off. It just throws them off for a loop. Why would they do this? And that's a question that begins to bother people's minds. So, yeah, they do it. Different reasons. The experienced perp usually does it because he is definitely trying to throw police off, and it won't be easy for them to figure it out. It won't be a staged burglary or a robbery where it's easily made out that it's fake. This guy just faked it. Those are usually people who don't have much experience.
Yeah, and there's certainly, everyone needs to know that there's a difference between signature and crime scene staging. And more than likely, the more experienced offender is somebody that has a signature, if it's a serial killer. And that could be as simple as posing bodies. Could be as simple as leaving a check mark, a zodiac symbol, whatever it is, compared to making the crime look to be something that it isn't. Does that make sense?
Correct. And mostly, absolutely. And serial killers don't worry about staging in terms of throwing police off.
Right.
When they do something, when they pose a person, when they do a particular signature, and let me explain this. I'm sure the audience is well aware of this. A signature isn't really what is required to commit the murder. It's very similar to when a person comes up to a football player. Peyton Manning, he comes up to, he's a quarterback. He starts calling all these numbers. It isn't necessary for the play. It's just what gets him going. A serial killer is very similar. Not to say Peyton Manning's a serial killer, I'm just saying that signatures are not required to accomplish the goal. It's only required in the perp's mind. He's doing it because he believes it makes him better at what he does. Baseball players come to the batting box and they play with their gloves, they scratch the thing, they look into the sky, they put their hat. That's their signature. It isn't necessary to hit the ball, but in their minds, they have to do it over and over. It's a repetitive thing. It's almost like OCD. They have to do it because they believe it's necessary, but it really isn't.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, actually. I like that. Does being on this channel in any way put you in harm's way at San Quentin?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's no other way to say it. Absolutely. It puts me in great danger. People here will look at this as me working with law enforcement, and they're not going to not always easy to do the right thing. It's not always easy to cross the street to defend somebody. It's a chance I'm willing to take to try and bring finalization, maybe help in some way. So yes, it does put me in harm's way, and it's going to continue to put me in harm's way for the rest of the time that I spend in prison.
Okay, well, this kind of piggybacks off of that question. We only have 3 questions to go here. It says, please ask Bill this question. Is there anyone on California death row who he is afraid of or would be afraid of, and why?
Well, honestly, I'm afraid of every person here. Every person here has a potential and can kill you. That being said, I'm very confident in my ability to read people and read yards. It's not that I'm fearless or anything. It's just the opposite. I'm very aware of fear. I'm very aware of that element. But anybody in particular? No, everybody. I'm afraid of everybody here. And it's just how I live my life. Every day before I leave my cell, I touch the wall above my cell door, and I say this to myself: today they'll try and kill me. It's how I live my life.
Okay, 2 more questions here. Again, this one here, I don't know if you can answer or not. It says, and they're going off of my model here, I can tell, because it says greed, sex, revenge. I often say you can place pretty much any murder off of those 3 reasonings.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Greed, sex, and revenge. Now, there's a lot of subcategories there, you know. Rage goes under a lot of subcategories, but for the most part, greed, sex, revenge. And I'll read you this question, then you can answer it if you want when you call back. It says, when you killed somebody, was it rage? And if so, what was going through your mind immediately afterwards? Was it remorse? Was it your thought of not getting caught? Was it relief? What was going through your mind? And
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
you can answer that when you call me back if you want. Okay. Now, and I want to preface this with this before you answer that, Bill. You don't have to answer this as in specifically to you. I think in general, it would be important for people to know when somebody commits the act of murder, and it's not a serial offender, and it's somebody that has remorse and does kill maybe out of rage or whatever it is, the post-offense behavior becomes very important in investigations. And you want to know, and I know for me personally, when I'm investigating a crime, I want to know, okay, the offense occurred, what was he thinking? What comes next in that offender's mind? And maybe that will help you answer this question a little bit better.
Well, yes, it does make it more specific, but my expertise mostly is with serial offenders and what they think and how they're thinking, because they are sociopaths and psychopaths. But in terms of a person who has remorse and a person who really understands that process, it depends on the person. Some people attempt suicide. Other people attempt suicide by drinking themselves to death or using drugs. Others try to hide. The natural, if you catch a child at 3 years old and he takes a candy, if he sees that you see him, he immediately hides his hand. It's an instinctive nature of a human being to hide whatever they're doing. It's not very common, as you probably know, Ken, that a person immediately comes to the police station and says, look, I committed this crime, I'm sorry. That's very rare. It probably doesn't happen very often. And I'm sure that in 20 plus years that you were a detective, you probably didn't see that happen not once.
Right.
People go through at different stages. And I disagree that there's only revenge, sex, and rage. I believe that fear, grief, there are a number of emotions that play part in that. And through grief, through fear, rage can come too. So there's a lot of different things in terms of how they act after that. That is anybody's guess. You've seen programs a million times where every person, being victim or perpetrator, acts different. It depends on the personality. It depends on how they process it. So there's no way of telling. I would be walking into uncharted waters to tell you how most people would act because I don't know.
Right.
I know that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you there.
Okay, well, that's the best way I can answer that question. I don't know. But there are different reasons and responses to how people respond. Sometimes a wall goes up. They don't think about it. They try and block it away, or it's blocked away because of such a traumatic situation that they block it.
Right.
That happens as well. So there's different things that can happen.
All right, last question. It looks like it's save the best for last. Why do you feel that you're an expert on serial murders? And why should anyone listen to you?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question, and I would be happy to answer it. My life has been a tragedy. There is no doubt that I could have been sent to prison and turned into a barbiturate, murderer, killer, but I chose to study things, study people, and it doesn't come to everybody. From a very early age, I became almost an expert of human behavior. I had to do so because I was afraid of my father, afraid of the bullies in the neighborhood, gangs. I had to know how to, and I very early on knew I could read people very well. That was the first part. When I came to prison, I began to take an interest in rehabilitation and how I could help, how I could give back. And it came to me several decades later of observing people for my own safety that I could read people and get close to them. When I did that, I became very close to serial killers with the intent of cracking their code. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. I am very interested in human behavior, why people act the way they do. And the first subject was my father. The second subject, by the way, was myself. I wanted to know why I acted the way I did. What caused me to act in certain ways in certain situations? And then next came killers. Look, you could read a book on how to operate on somebody, but I wouldn't suggest that you operate on anybody. Someone who reads a bunch of books and then tries to profile or understand killers, I think that's ridiculous. Now, law enforcement, who works the cases, understands they have a better insight. But a person like myself, who has lived with serial killers for more than 39 years, actually, today is December 20th. Today, I've been in prison for 39 years. Today is, if you want to call it, an anniversary is the day I was arrested, December 20th, 1983.
Wow.
Since that day, I've been observing people. I've been observing not only law enforcement, but killers. I've read about them to supplement what I already know. What makes me such, I believe, a person with good insight. Like, I don't have all the answers, and I would be an idiot to tell you that I do. I have insight, and I believe that insight is worth something. Can it help? Ken and I know that it can because of what we're doing together in a case that we're not talking about. But what makes me such an expert is that I see them every day. And I see them when they're not in an interview room talking to law enforcement with a cup of coffee.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
When they have something to gain and they know that they have all the power because law enforcement want to know what they know and they know how to play with that. They are putting in an Oscar-winning performance. With me, all the shields come down. They're acting like they normally would act. They're interacting with other killers. In most parts, they're serial killers. I was able to fool them. Not gonna lie to you, I manipulated my way into serial killers' lives to learn about them. I have an insider's view that no one's ever had before, unless you're a serial killer. But serial killers don't talk. And if they do talk, they only have an expertise about what they did. I have been close to more than 40 serial killers. And I've learned everything I can about each and every one of them. I I read them like encyclopedias. That gives me an insider's view. Is it perfect? No. Is there a lot of my own behavior analysis? Yes. But I think it's valuable. And it does give the public a little bit of a safety net when it comes to these guys. Each one of these guys is different. Every serial killer is different. And I always end my shows with, be safe, be aware of your surroundings. Your life could depend on it. I mean exactly that. You never know when they're watching you.
Okay, I know I said that was the last question, but you just said something there that made me think. I want to go back to one of the very first questions where I said we did not, well, at least me, I might have said we. I wasn't ready to say that this Idaho murder was a serial killing. You, I think, contradicted that and disagree, and I just want to make sure I'm right. You believe this is a serial offender.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I believe he's experienced. I believe this person is a serial offender and will offend again. It's because of the nature of the crime. There's 4 people in one shot.
With a knife.
And they're all very personal.
Now, would it be different to you as it would to me if the weapon was different? Because to me, if it was, it changes everything, I believe, if a handgun was used and 4 people were killed. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't 100% agree because, look, Richard Ramirez used the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple victims, same night. So I know, I don't, I just believe that the knife for him, he likes to be very personal. He likes to be close. He could have got a gun. Guns can be bought anywhere, especially in that part of the country. I believe it's an official, a serial offender, and I believe he'll offend again.
Okay. Well, good enough. Anything to say before I end this?
Just that I appreciate you taking the time to ask these questions, and I appreciate that your audience has, in fact, taken the time to ask the questions. I hope I answered them in a way that they believe that I was being candid, because I was to the best of my ability, and that I hope it helped in some way so they understand what I do and what we're trying to do. Okay.
I'm going to stop the recording. Well, there you have it. There was our conversation today with Bill Noguera. Not a lot of insight to help me. There was some there, not as much as the first episode, because he was mostly just trying to answer your questions, and that's what that was about. You saw me and him disagree on some things, and that is good. If he was to agree with me on everything, I would think, okay. But when he's disagreeing, that means he's thinking, okay? I liked his analogy about, if you want a doctor to operate on you, would you just want the person who's read a bunch of books and then operate, or somebody that has first-hand knowledge to operate on you? Say the same thing about flying a plane. Would you want the guy that's just read the books about flying an airplane to take you up there and risk your life? Or would you want somebody that's actually flew an aircraft and read books? I'd take the latter instead of the former. So that analogy I thought was very good. As he prefaced, we're going to do the yogurt shop murders next week. That's a case that has always bugged me, and I thought it would be a good one for Bill to study. Now, how does he get this information? I believe his attorney or somebody else gives him the information to look at, and he goes off of that. And, we'll see if he sees something that maybe I missed. I was very thorough on those yogurt shop murders, if you go back and look at my episodes on that. It's one of those cases that stuck with me. I thought it would be important. There are certain cases that I feel are important to get Bill's opinion on. This was one of those cases. So I'm curious to see what he's going to come up with for the yogurt shop murders next week. That is it for today's Unsolved No More and today's Redemption from Death Row. I know there's going to be a lot of questions about what murder I solved, because Bill kind of let the cat out of the bag on that. I guess not. I mean, you guys who've watched me knew that I solved one, and I said you'll hear more about it later, and you will when the time's right. Right now, I'm still sorting out some things and going through some things before I can announce it. But yeah, I mean, just do what I'm here to do. That's as simple as I can put it. And Bill's help was instrumental in that, and everyone needs to know that. So, hey, and let's make no mistake about it. He's not my co-host. Some people have said he's a co-host. He's a guest speaker, and I'm not friends with Bill. Okay, I don't know him. My circle of friends in my life, you can count on one hand. I have a lot of acquaintances and people I'll say hi to, but that don't mean they're my friend. He is somebody who intrigues me and allows me to expand my knowledge when it comes to solving cold cases. And that is it. That's the gist of it. Okay? And I appreciate him for that, for allowing me to gain that insight. Some stuff, as you probably have seen, I agree with, some I don't. But that's life, right? So thanks for tuning in. Until next time, hey, Maine's out.